Welcome to another Digimedia Innovation Circle. Today I have the pleasure to introduce our special guest, Víctor Navarro-Remesal from Tecnocampus, Pompeu Fabra University. If you are wondering who is Víctor, well, he's a professor, a researcher, an author of books that are valuable in game design, beyond teaching us a bit of Spanish. Libertad dirigida, I don't know if it is, una gramática de análisis y diseño de videojuegos, sorry for my Spanish, Pensar, juego, 25 caminos para los game studies, and Cine Ludens, 50 diálogos entre juego y cine. I also heard that there is a forthcoming edited book on perspectives on the European video games, and this one is in English. Player freedom, Zen-inspired games, Japanese video games, and game preservation. These are some of his research interests, and he will be presenting Asymmetrical cooperative play, doing international game research from the fringes. Just let me remind that this is a recorded event, and you can leave your questions or comments in the chat or post them later after our speaker's presentation. So without further ado, I ask that you give full attention to our keynote speaker, Víctor. Please make yourself at home and welcome once again.
Obrigado, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to speak in English since this is in English. Afterwards, we can speak in Portuguese and Spanish. My Portuguese is a lot worse than your Spanish, don't worry. And today I am bringing a collection of random thoughts, so I hope it makes sense, but I'm sure it's going to be better in the discussion part than in my presentation, because it's, I don't want it to be seen as a collection of advices, because I'm an absolute beginner yet. I learn every day and I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time, but I'm doing like a million things at the same time. So take it as the advice of someone who has been doing game studies, game research for more than a decade now, and who's trying to do maybe too many things at the same time, but who's trying to do things at least. So it's going to be very practical, and the potential advice that's going to be in the presentation is advice addressed at me. I'm not trying to tell anyone off and criticize anyone. I'm trying to think with myself, to myself, and to guide myself as best as I can. So it's a very stoic way of organizing your ideas. This is advice for self, and if it's useful for anyone else, I will be happy to discuss it later. And Nelson here, who very kindly invited me to think about these ideas in public, asked me actually to talk about a very specific part of this presentation. So it's coming, Nelson, but I've tried to put it together in a wider package because I think we have to talk, when we discuss international cooperation, we have to talk about what this international cooperation means. And it's something that I've been actually giving a lot of thought for many years. So the presentation is going to be in 3 parts, together with these six main ideas, 6 main keywords or collections of centers of gravities, since we are discussing fringes and peripheries and so on and so forth. The first part is going to be focused on things I have done, and sorry if that's too self-promotional. I don't want it to be self-promotional, but I'm going to reflect on the things I've done. Then I will share my experiences with international cooperation and why am a strong believer in international cooperation. And then I will end up with Letter to Santa Claus, or the Three Wise Men, Los Reyes Magos. I don't know how you call them in Portugal. What do you celebrate there? But like a list of wishes for the future. Things I will try to be very optimistic. It's a Friday and we are very tired. So it's going to be very optimistic with the future, things I want to do with other things I want to see done, even if I'm not part of them. So these 3 blocks are going to revolve around these questions. Why come together at all? Why shouldn't I stay at home and be this kind of very wise Heideggerian thinker that doesn't need others to think and sees the ends of the discipline at hand? Why, when we come together, we should do it on an international level and not only in local communities? How to combine these local and international networks, and this is something I'm trying to, again, set up as guidelines to myself. How to consider the potential asymmetries, which is in the title. And if we cooperate, when there's more than 2 people, there's always going to be asymmetries. No matter how equal you seem, there's always going to be asymmetries and imbalances. How to think about this idea of the fringes, and then my personal reflections are going to be all over the place. So with no further ado, well, with one additional caveat, actually, I'm going to discuss a lot of institutionalization, how to create institutional networks and structures. And I'm not an expert in this area. I'm trying to do this. I don't know how to use the system most of the time. So my main worry is that when we create these networks, these institutional networks, they end up eating everything, and we end up focusing just in playing the game, in gaming the system, instead of using the networks to bring together people, to bring together humans that want to collaborate. Because I think academia is a collective endeavor in search for the truth, lower letter, not capital, and in search of knowledge. So it's very idealistic, but it should be conducted by people and not by bureaucracy. So we have to keep this in mind when we try to make things more formal. And what I've done in this regard, very quickly, a few years ago, well, I started my research career when I was a PhD student in a doctoral school by CREA, the summer school, SUSO, in 2008, I think. It was a long time ago. And 20 years later, CREA put together this book reflecting on the history of the summer school and on the things we have learned from the summer school. So together with my very esteemed colleague, Ignacio Berjillos, we wrote a short chapter with a very clear title, A Vindication of Academic Engagement in the European Space, defending that we see from our experiences and interviewing other past collaborators, that we see these kind of spaces as spaces for 3 things: internationalization as kind of a personal process, collaboration, meaning doing things together, sharing references, putting bids for international projects together, sharing advice, peer reviewing, this kind of things, and engagement, which is more of an affective involvement, an affective network, trying to support others and trying to create this kind of trust networks. I think trust is something to be regained in society, and trust should be driven academia in general, and any intellectual activity and endeavor and enterprise we do. So internationalization, collaboration and engagement are the 3 things that moved us to participate in this summer school, and that have guided us in this decade plus studying together and researching together and so on and so forth. And the book that you announced is coming in less than month. We co-edited, my also esteemed colleague Oliver Perla-Torre and me put it together because we had been talking about what a European video game is for a long time from two separate fronts. Myself as a cultural critic, when I'm not a researcher and I'm not sleeping, I try to write for cultural magazines, and I try to talk to the filmmaker and get to the public. And Oliver had a paper on the European video games, and we noticed that Europe tends to be packed together with America, with the United States. And again, I use America because they use America there, but America and the Americas are a lot bigger. But European video games are not American and not North American, and they have a different production context and a different consumption context. So we started thinking about this. We invited a few colleagues to do something small and to think together, and it has ended up being quite a big book. So we are very excited to share it with you. It's only the start of the conversation, but we are very adamant on using it as a starting point, as something to be discussed by other people. And we want to see what comes from this, even if people don't like it. I look forward for the rebuttals, how they don't like it, how do they think we got the European video game wrong. Maybe people think there's no European video game, so that's a very provocative conversation to be had if there's no European video game at all. But Europe as a cultural space is a different area from Japan and from the United States. So at least we should talk about that, because that's where we work, that's where we live, that's where we interact as scholars and as players and as citizens of Europe, whatever that means. And in there's a lovely prologue by Tuel Mortensen, see of European collaboration on, I mean, she has helped me lots of things that can be done on a very practical level. So I'm very happy to have people like Nelson here in the book, Tuel here in the book. We wrote this presentation on the origins, Europe as a region, and the shared imaginaries of Europe, to try to have at least one text that discusses how Europe is a space of internationalization. And if we are to discuss the European video games, we are going to share a lot of things, but we are going to need to connect very different local spaces. So I think Europe is perfect for this kind of combination of internationalization and local thinking. So I hope you like it when it's out. It's out in, I think it's 2 weeks. Whoa, 2 weeks, 2 weeks plus. And this is what we are trying to defend in there. And on a local level, a Spanish level, I started a collection with a publishing house called Shangrila that published the book that came out of my thesis a few years ago, Libertad, dirigida, directed freedom. And they had received a lot of proposals for books on video games, and they said, Victor, why don't we stop reacting and start looking for the people that can contribute to this kind of books? And we opened this collection called Ludográfias, focus on giving some space to game scholars that try to write in Spanish, because I think it's important to write and speak in English, but I think it's also important to have a place where you can discuss your production, your scholar production in your own language or languages. So this was the first book, Pensar el juego, 25 scholars, myself included, discussing and sharing the most important idea they see in the future. They see to go forward, 25 paths, 25 ways to be walked by game studies and by game scholars. So I think it's a very nice map of what game studies are in Spain at the moment. It's not comprehensive. It's not exhaustive. There's a lot more. The proof of that, is that the upcoming conference has like 12 panels. Yeah, 12 panels in 3 days. So we have plenty of people coming here, and game studies are actually quite big. We were surprised by that, but 25 people in one single book, in the first book of the collection, is something to be celebrated. So we have this collection. We put together a special issue of a quite important journal on film studies. So we are trying to, and I'm sharing this again, not to self-promote, but to show the kind of efforts that we are doing in Spain to bring together the community. And this one in particular, I want to share it because it's not a game journal, it's a film studies journal. Because again, I'm going to discuss the fringes. So we are in the fringes of media studies. We are sharing some spaces with film studies, and we have to look for this kind of opportunities. We have created DIGRA Spain. We are very happy to have done this. It was announced I think 9 months ago, 10 months ago. And we were very clear that on our aims and goals, we wanted to connect the Spanish community while at the same time developing stable relationships with the international community. And you can see here that we highlight the European space, the Iberian space together with you, Southern Europe, Spanish-speaking countries. Well, we have some personal relationships with scholars in Brazil, so the global South and South America spaces to be explored, and that's a whole chain of connections that can be developed through institutions like this, through something like DIGRA Spain. So I hope something comes out of this. And we also highlight that we want to take care of PhD students, to give them some space to start their careers and to feel less isolated, PhD students and early career scholars. You can hear more about that in the Critical Distance podcast. I was invited together with Tiago Falco. I was very happy to discuss DIGRA Spain and DIGRA Brazil together. I think Brazil, Spain, and India are growing up at the same time, and there's a very interesting collaboration there. And we have the conference in, again, 2 weeks, 2 weeks and a half. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen, that are happening here at the moment. It's not only me, there's a lot of people trying to finally create a community. We have a community of personal relationships. We have been doing things together for a long time, formal and informal publishing, writing, thinking, but there was no institution. So it's very hard to present yourself out in the open when you don't have a central office, so to speak. And what I've learned, being a beginner, being a junior, trying to navigate these waters, is that we need to have local plus international networks. Having only international networks is not very fruitful in the future, because the international networks, spoiler, are always local on a big scale. They have a very local central point, focal point, and then they expand and we come into these local international spaces. So we have to combine these local spaces in a huge network. That is, we have had to get used to Zoom, unfortunately, but now we have the tool, and I think we are going to learn how to use the tool and how to avoid this Zoom fatigue we all have, to create spaces that were not available, especially for countries that are geographically disconnected, that don't have the funding to bring people in, to countries that can be, they don't need to have a smaller economy. I'm thinking, for example, of New Zealand, which I love. It's one of my favorite countries, and it's very hard to go to New Zealand. It's like running a marathon or even worse. So creating this combination of in-person, where you can dine with people, you can think with people, you can have fun, and putting together with that online spaces like this is a very, I think, a very clever, good way to go forward. Again, formal and informal, we need to remember that we are people, with passions, with energy, with different levels of energy, that we need to help each other, and we need to leave each other alone when we need some alone time, some me time, because we are intellectuals, we are thinkers, and we need to, again, that principle in Latin, I always forget how to phrase it in Latin, that united in need, when in not need, being alone. I'm translating from Latin at the moment. And always charity, always compassion, no? Being friendly. But this doesn't need that we need to be together all the time. We need to save some space for the individual. And I'm very individualistic in a way that has taken me a lot of time to accept, because I think I thought I wasn't, but I think that individuality, a healthy individualism, means that you take responsibility for what you do. Ethics is always individual. You have a responsibility and you have to own up to that responsibility. So in that way, I equate individualism with autonomy and responsibility. So again, this is no defense of any kind of neoliberal thought or any kind of these things that are very, very unhealthy. But we need to combine these autonomous individuals in shared communities. We need to let people know that they can join the community, they can get out of the community. There's no or as little group pressure as possible, but we need this network, and we need the network to be flexible, but also institutional. We need it to be representative, to have the power to represent the individuals and to defend the kind of knowledge that we explore. Because I had a slide with Mary-Ann Buckles at the beginning. I took it out because it was too long, but Mary-Ann Buckles is the very embodiment of the need for a community. She opened the way for us, for game researchers, but she had no community to work with. So she didn't have an academia to be a part of. We need to avoid that. When I did my PhD, I was the only scholar, the only PhD student in my department working with video games. And a few, I think it was 2-3 years ago, I started looking for PhD students in Spain to see how they were doing, if they were doing fine, if they had good supervising, if they felt welcome in the community. And to my surprise and to my personal pain, they all told me the same story I had lived. They were the only ones in the departments studying video games. They felt pretty isolated. They didn't know how to navigate game studies and the game studies community. They often went to international conferences and they knew nobody in Spain. So that's something that happens a lot. And they felt the need for a community. So that's something we have to keep in mind. And since games and video games are such a weird cultural object, we need to be very aware of our fringes. For example, I've seen colleagues in philosophy I've heard them say, I don't do game studies, I do philosophical research on video games or in games. I only do engineering or artificial intelligence. So we need to be very aware of what are the fringes of this weird thing that we call game studies. For example, I'm a media scholar. My training is in media. I tend to think of myself as a media scholar. I'm very interested in animation and in film studies, but I work in games. So when I try to cross that boundary, it's not always smooth. So we are in the fringes in many ways, in the fringes of the academias, of the research communities of our countries, in the fringes, sometimes in Portugal, in Spain, on the fringes of international game studies communities, in the fringes of disciplines. So we have to at least be very aware of that. And one problem to consider when we discuss geographical fringes or peripheries, such as Spain or Portugal, is that even if we are very idealistic, we live under a citation economy, and this citation economy is not neutral. We end up, I tried to do this very silly graphic here, where the center is self-referential, and then the different peripheries are citing, referencing the center, but not citing themselves. They are not establishing any kind of connection. And this is not something, only something to do with citations, which is a bit too cynical, perhaps, but it has to do with dialogue, with having conversations. So if we don't talk to each other, to the people we have, Spain, Portugal, Southern Europe, to the people we have close by, we end up all looking upwards. And it is not always the fault of the people upstairs when they don't see us, because they are very busy and they have a lot of things to do, and they have worked very hard to be successful, and they sometimes just look for references in English. They have some biases with surnames, for example, because I've seen PhD students in Spain have these biases. They trust someone called Williams or whatever more than someone called Garcia or no. And I'm not criticizing anyone. Again, that's something I have seen and something I try to be, because my first impulse is to search for references in English as well. I've been trying to read Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, to try to expand that and to fix that a bit. Because again, a citation economy is a part of a marketplace of attention. So the flow of attention can be unequal and imbalanced. And the conditions, the working conditions are different in every country. So we have to be, when we actually collaborate, we have to be very open with that. I have a huge teaching load. That's my teaching load for this trimester on screen. It's public information. And nowadays, when I start a project with some international colleague, this is the first thing I send, because being very busy with teaching here is not the same as being very busy teaching in Brazil or in Norway or in Germany. So we have to educate each other on how academia works in every country, because some people are going to have teaching buyout, some people are going to not have teaching buyout, but other kind of advantages. So I think that's part of the agreement. Okay, I can collaborate, and this is going to be a bit less smooth because we don't live under the same conditions. We don't have to fulfill the same requirements, but we want to make that happen. So, okay, this is my availability. This is what I can do. Many times I've been in a room where I was the only one from Southern Europe, and people have discussed we need more diversity, which I am always in favor of. But then the diversity is always in the North Hemisphere. And since Spain is in that weird place where we are part of Europe, but we are South, and we are connected to South America, but we are kind of not, and we are not the global South. So we are a fringe in a way, a geographical fringe. I try to be very aware of that to connect people. So I don't think people that forget that they need Southern partners do it because they want to ignore Southern partners. I think they are just used to having more people doing game research in the North. The language is a huge barrier, and I wrote this defending the use of English, which I'm using now, but again, warning of the dangers of only using English. The dangers for the people that are native in English, and the dangers for the people that are non-fluent or not natives. And there's a huge danger in importing language and conceptual frameworks. I'm not going to go too much in depth, but for example, the word native in Europe is quite a bit different from the word native in the Americas. I've talked about this, the fringes of the disciplines, and well, when the words are mentioned in game studies, the old words, the new words, formalist versus politically motivated, at France might explain in a very good article. We have to think that we leave things outside the main conversation, and that's another kind of fringe. There's never only two poles to a field. I know I'm running out of time, but I just want to jump to the things I want to see in the future. Again, we have to be aware of these problems, the different criteria, the double-edged sort of diversity. We are all made to compete in an environment where we should be all collaborating. So we have to be aware that we compete one day and then we have to collaborate the next day. And we are always grant hunting, especially those in more prominent positions and prominent centers. This is my motivational slides. There's a lot of problems, but the biggest problem will be that these many problems can make it hard for us to see that the advantages outweigh them. And I put these motivational speakers from Auntie Donna here. I hate motivational. I tend to be very pessimistic, but I have to have this motivational slide to finish on this list of things I want to see, these horizons I want to chase. For example, Iberian cooperation. That's something I've already said, and I really believe in this. And now we have two institutions. You have the SPCB there. We have DIGRA Spain. We can get together, Portugal and Spain. Southern Europe. This is what Nelson wanted me to explain a few years ago. I opened this very informal private group on Facebook. That's the platform economy for you, where I wanted people from Southern Europe not to get together to cut themselves off from the North, but to be aware that we are a lot of people here and that we have strength in numbers, not to compete with the North, but on the contrary, to be good partners and allies to the North and to create a more balanced Europe. So we have to work on these rhizomatic networks. I think Spain, India, and Brazil have a shared future, and I want to do something together with them. I've informally said something, told them to do something like that, maybe next year, maybe in a couple of years, some kind of gathering, virtual gathering. We have to connect associations, institutions, but also individuals. We have to do better dissemination. This is very ambitious and very hard to do, so I don't know how to really do it. But one way could be to translate texts to other European languages, to other non-European languages. Visits and exchanges are a very good way to do this on a personal level. They can conflict with work-life balance. They need funding, but they are more personal and they are very productive, even if nothing comes out of the visit. It's a long-term thing, and the seeds that you plant when you visit someone are going to give beautiful fruits in the future. And hosting online guests like this is a very good way to create this kind of networks. I'm very happy to be here. So that's all. I've done 30 minutes of presentation plus the intro, and I'm all yours now to discuss and to think with you. I don't really have answers to give you. As you can see, I want to hear your questions to ask myself these questions for the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Víctor, for this very enlightening and need for cooperation and international networks in game studies. I guess that we have some time to have questions. Does anyone in the audience want to pose any question for our keynote? This is the moment that everybody is shy and
I'm seeing Andre has his finger on the air. Yeah. But you should click on the reaction, Andre. For the
I looked for the reaction, but I couldn't find it.
Okay, go for it.
Missed it. I think the last updates hide the raising hand, so I use the analogic way.
No problem.
Okay, no, just a question, because I like that term, citation economy. So how do you think you can overcome this citation economy between the researchers? I think this is there's any way. I think there is not a magic pill, you know, to break those barriers. How can we overcome that?
I don't have an answer for that. I only have intuitions, and again, I don't think there's a clear solution. And I think there's some good ways in counting the references, because we need to measure impacts. So again, I'm an absolute beginner in here. I just try to read and listen to the people that know more about this than myself. But I think it's very corrupt when you only count the number of times and the prestige of the journal when the knowledge is owned by private companies and they profit from these structures, but we don't. I'm not only talking about money, about economical profit. I'm talking about needing these points for your CV and needed to get citations or publish here, publish there. This publish or perish thing that has become publish and perish, or at least publish and get very tired. It's very hard to measure quality, but at least we should have some kind of counterbalance to that. Not to have, okay, you have the metrics, you have the H20 factor and whatever, but you have also this other measure, this only the qualitative factor, impact factor that can be presented, and that is worth something as cultural capital within our field. Because otherwise we are just looking for citations, and that's a very easy to game system. But in this case in particular, my worry is that that's a very self-fulfilling circle. Once something is cited frequently, it's exponential. To get within that citation economy, I don't even know how many references I have. I tend to be a disaster as a scholar in that regard. Because I publish when I see a call that is very interesting to me and that makes me think. I'm a very bad planner. I tend to forget the Scopus and JCR and these kind of things of the journals I like. So I'm terrible at this. I wouldn't follow my advice in that regard. But I think we at least need to break these imbalances by bringing in new people, and that that can be complemented by having some kind of qualitative measures. And I'm sure I'm forgetting about some kind of qualitative impact factor that someone's going to tell me about, and I will say, yeah, so that's a solution. So at least it's a problem. At least we know it's a problem, and we are all agreeing more and more on the problem, and that's the first step.
Victor, I would say that in some sort, what you were discussing previously, the way you want to build these communities and bringing people together, and the example that you gave in the beginning when you were doing your PhD in Spain and you were alone, and then you tried to find other students doing PhDs in games. I believe this is the path. This is the way to do it. Is to talk more, dialogue more between each others. And instead, and if I know better your work, for sure I will cite your work instead of only looking for William or McDonald or something like that. For sure, there are studies on that, but we know that all of us have these kinds of preconceptions, and we are inside this frame of mind that says to us, even if we counterbalance, that says to us that what is English is better. And this is a very problematic issue at the moment in academia. My hope is that in 50 years or 100 years, maybe the things will change. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's not a zero-sum game. You can both cite Nunez in Spain and Williams and whatever, because it's an international endeavor, and people from different countries are going to have different perspectives. And also something that's important to me, people are never fully representative of their countries. So it's not, okay, I have a Portuguese girl and I have a Brazilian guy, so I have Brazil covered. Because every country and every culture, if a culture is something, is a field for disagreement. A healthy culture is a field of debate, of disagreements, and you hate your neighbor and you want to kill your neighbor and you don't agree on nothing, but then you just see someone you haven't seen for a long time and you say, okay, you're my mates, come here, and we're not going to agree all ever, but we love talking about that, and we need to have a work to do. If we all suddenly agree on everything, we stop writing and stop publishing. But getting together again is bringing in the individual, and that's when I realized I was individualistic in that regard. I want people to speak as individuals, not people to speak as representatives of a community. Okay, I'm part of this community, I'm part of this one, because again, even delimiting the community you belong to is very hard nowadays.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first step, as you say, is knowing the people that you have near you and that can have an impact on your geographical community.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Víctor. And thank you, Nelson. More questions or comments?
I want to hear about the problems you have in your different geographical areas in these problems I've posed here, because I'm sure it's going to be very different from Spain, but there's going to be some similarities.
Well, I have been thinking a lot of one thing that you said, that is internationalization is very important, and of course the collaboration, but it can also be a spoiler of our local communities. And when taking game design into account, we studied the language of the game genre, and the needs of having self-expression and identities, personal identities in game design. I have been wondering if the culture, the local culture, would be in the next years a factor that we have to take into account in game design more than the game genre itself. For example, in Japanese culture, we know that some of the local problems and the architecture, everything is mirrored in some games. In America as well. In Europe, it is difficult to see it. We see, for example, in Assassin's Creed, we see in the architecture, we see in the teams cover it. But in Europe, what is the main influences of our cultural aspects that are being brought into games? And like you said, DIGRA may be an effort to reunite these old cultures, but local cultures, and to bring in games is one of the main challenges, because we also need to incite the game industry to adopt that strategy in the game development. I don't know if
there's a lot of one to say in connection to your comment, because you have so many interesting things. But I'm at the moment coordinating a conference cycle for the Spanish branch of Japan Foundation. And when they asked me about, because I study Japanese video games, when they asked me about that, the first thing I warned against is I've been to Japan many times. I speak very bad Japanese. I almost have forgotten all my Japanese. I do love Japan, but none of my Japanese friends play video games. And every time I go there, I see things that very straightforwardly contradict what I think I know about Japan. So I'm going to talk about Japan from Europe, and I'm going to give, I'm going to invite people that can be aware of that difference. Because, for example, a very dear friend of mine, Yoshi, has a PhD on Almodóvar. And my favorite filmmaker is Yasujiro Ozu. And when we discuss, no, Ozu Yasujiro, no, Pedro Almodóvar, he says, Ozu is very boring. So it's the other way around. And cultures grow in context. So we have to be united in diversity on many levels, as cultures and as individuals. But the problem is that the international nature of video games, as you said, in the industry, has tended to erase every local factor. So I think it's very bad to say, okay, you're Brazilian. I want to see a Brazilian video game. I want you to do Brazilian folklore. I want you to do Brazilian politics, and otherwise I'm not going to be interested in the game. I don't want to force a Brazilian developer or a Taiwanese developer to be Brazilian or Taiwanese, but I don't want these developers to do things that have nothing to do with their immediate lives just to be a part of the video game industry. I love traveling. It's very polluting, so I'm very conflicted. I love traveling, and I went to Bhutan, which was one of my dreams, and I came back from Bhutan with Bhutanese movies, Bhutanese books. I watch Bhutanese TV every once in a while. It's on YouTube. I read Bhutanese newspapers. There's no Bhutanese video games, so I don't know what Bhutanese players play or want to say in a video game. And I fear that if I ever find a Bhutanese game, it's going to be a clone of an American idea. So it's very hard to balance that. I think you have to nudge people in directions at most, and you have to respect people's freedoms to do as they want with their cultures. But the influences in the industry and in connection to that in academia are so strong that sometimes you have to remind, hey, you can do something local. You can go out and take some pictures and base your game in Aveiro, which is lovely. You can base your game in Mallorca, which is a very beautiful game, and there are no games set in Mallorca, as far as I know. And when people in Mallorca or in Barcelona make video games, they take place in an indefinite United States of America. So I don't know how to balance that, because I think if you insist on, we're going to reward local games about local issues, that's a paradoxical cultural identity. Andrew Dorman talks about paradoxical Japaneseness in Japanese cinema. When you know that international audiences are going to celebrate any traits of your local culture, you perform that culture. And I am a vegetarian animalist. I love animalist philosophy, animal rights. So I hate bullfighting. I don't drink sangria. I don't know how to dance flamenco. If I go to another country and they say, oh, flamenco, toros, tal, it's going to be insulting. So we don't have to reduce people to stereotypes, but we have to grant them, to give them the space to discuss their realities. I don't know if that makes sense, and it was too long, sorry, but that's the way I try to say it.
That led to another question, I'm sorry, but you think that this transference of culture into the medium, of the game medium, is a role of the game designer or the player as using the media to express their own identity and culture and build the media through sharing that and molding, or if it is a matter of both parts, game designers and game players.
I'm very boring because I'm very Taoist in that regard, even if I'm not Chinese or Korean or Japanese. I think it's always and both, because games are both objects, cultural objects and activities. And that's very provocative what you said. It could be very interesting to compare play styles in Japan, Europe and America of the same game, for example. And you have games that allow for more creativity, creative freedom, like Minecraft, of course, but even the way people play Bayonetta or Resident Evil can be conditioned by their environments. And just yesterday, I had a guest here, Mateo Terrasa, discussing the aesthetics of difficulty. And some student asked him about regional differences. Why are Japanese video games more difficult than American games? And then we looked for Japanese opinions, and they say Japanese games are easier than American games. So they had a very different perception. And then we saw that some Japanese games were made easier when they got to America, to the United States, of course. And then they had a video game rental, and they didn't want games to be, they want players to be able to complete video games in one rental session, in one weekend. So they brought the difficulty up. So the tendency changed, and a very simple factor changed the way different cultures played the same game. And in Europe, sometimes we got the Japanese version, and sometimes we got the United States version. So Battletoads was very difficult, but then we have the Mega Drive version of Battletoads, which was based on the Japanese version. So it's a complete mess. And at least we should be aware of the context, and we should compare context, because sometimes it's going to be developer-led, sometimes it's going to be player-led. And another case, and that's the end of the answer, I promise. When Yakuza Ryoga Gotoku got to Europe and the United States, they cut a lot of content because it was very Japanese. And players say, no, we want Japanese-ness. We want to play Yakuza precisely because it's very Japanese. And Nagoshi, in an interview, said, in Japan, Yakuza is like a very weird fictional version of Japan, and it's very over the top. And in the West, they play it as a documentary. They come to Japan and say, oh, this is in Yakuza, this is from Yakuza. Oh, I recognize this, and I recognize that. And people in the West value these kind of things even more than people in Japan, because it's not a matter of realism, it's a matter of being in touch with another culture. So it's always complex.
Let me just say, to connect with this Japanese thing, because Murakami is one of the authors that sells a lot here in Europe and United States, and we came to know some time ago that a lot of his first books were cut for more than 25 pages or 50 pages because they were afraid that people would not understand the culture. But let me go back to the other question that Liliana had, and that you answered that about this question of that you discussed. So people creating games in Portugal and in Spain and over Europe, they create this space that don't exist, but that we feel is American. And this is also another economy, as you were talking about citations, is the economy of the global culture that is American, that is North American, because as you are always emphasizing, and I need to emphasize also, America is not only North America, but even our colleagues from South are even worse, because every time we talk about America, but we are only talking about North America. So it's even crazy. But this is a kind of economy because these guys made they grab the entire landscape of media and they are the landscape of the media. If you want to talk globally, you need to talk an American way of representing the world.
And that brings to a place where people say America, United States, neutral. That's the way things are. And something taking place in Portugal, at best, oh, how quaint. How quaint. So we tend to ignore that everything is very local, and the cop eating donuts and that shitty coffee they have there is a very local thing. So no one in academia had done, and I'm going to flatter you, get ready, what you did in your chapter in the Perspectives of European Video Games book, that you identified a tradition in the European arts, naturalism, and you say, is naturalism reflected in European video games? And you found some games that were not taking part of that tradition, of that lineage, but then you saw that some games were indeed very naturalistic, and that set them apart from American and Japanese games. But no one had asked that question before, and that's why we wanted to publish that book, because we wanted people to ask questions. And again, I know your chapter was very hard to write, and we are very, very thankful, but I'm trying to hype you up for the book. That kind of questions are all over the book. The book is not a complete exploration of Europe and the European video game, but it's a collection of questions we should be asking, like, okay, video games are a cultural object, a cultural industry, and Europe has its own traditions in culture and in cultural industries, there's going to be some kind of transference. It's impossible not to have any kind of transference from for example, the kind of humor we do have in Spain, the kind of humor they have in Denmark, which I feel very close to, the Danish humor. So if someone makes a game in Denmark, even if they don't want to, if they make a joke within the game, that's going to be influenced by the regional humor or British humor, also on and so forth. So we talk about humor in the book, you talk about naturalism, that's the kind of questions we want to see on the table.
Okay, so Nelson had the chapter spoiled.
Sorry.
And now I don't know if anyone has any questions. We are just in time, but I didn't want to close this session without giving the word.
You need to push people. Let's see what Francisco. Don't you have a question, Francisco? Yeah, you you don't want to ask anything, but you were so you. Andre is again, but I was now to okay. Go, Andre. Sorry, it's Liliana to say, not me.
You may start. You can start.
Sorry.
I have just a question. You told that even we have the difficulty to produce local games with a local culture. I was thinking about that. Even the indie games has the same difficult. I don't know if you agree with that or not, because you talk about the local success games. You talk a little bit about Brazil and Brazilian. So I was remembered the last game that Brazil produced, that's Horizon Chase. I don't know if you have heard. It's a racing game, but it's a racing game that you feel like you're driving a car in California, not in Brazil, not in Rio. So even the indie, it has a huge success on PlayStation, Nintendo, computers. So even the indie games has this difficult to produce games with local contents. I don't know if you agree or if you...
Yeah. And there are two very good books on indie games, Jasper's Handmade Pixels and Real Games. It's not only on indie games, but it's on the kind of discussions the gaming communities have about what's a real game, what's not a real game. And I think and I fear that indie has become a label that's very samey. It's the same kind of game, and you have a lot of tropes, a lot of repetition. And for example, I'm very tired of very sentimental indie games that feel like, sorry, a teenager's book of poetry, a teenager's poem. Like, yeah, we know that you are trying to express feelings through monsters, and sadness is a monster. Okay, yeah. But tell me about what kind of sadness do you feel as a person? Tell me about what kind of community trauma you have in your area. And I love Horizon Chase. And if the developers wanted to make a game like Outrun, grants, good on them. I mean, I will never tell people, no, you have to set it in Brazil and you have to have Brazilian music. Because again, I think cultures thrive in exchanges. But my problem is with this default mode of culture and this one-way transference, okay? Because when we have the other kind of transfers, it's just for caricatures and it's just for tokenism and it's just for, yeah, and now they are going to travel to Spain. This kind of TV movies made in Germany about very rich ladies spending one summer in quaint places, normally in Mallorca or, yeah, I know, but I mean, we have been together for a long time and a lot of German people live here. There's a lot more to be said about Spain from Germany than that. And there's a lot more to be consumed that's made in Spain in Germany than that. So my push will be for better exchanges. I think we have to, I'm very happy when people set their games in different countries, but not when it's just a default. The Californian sun, the Californian fields, and a racing game through the country is very hard to do in a small country. So I mean, America, United States is very big, so the open road, that's part of the American imaginary. And it seems that I don't like America. I do love a lot of things about America: David Lynch, Patti Smith, 6 Feet Under, Bad Religion, American Punk. A lot of my favorite cultural totems are from America. But when I see them, they say something transcendental or universal through the local, through the situated. And we have to learn how to do that. Said something in Portugal, aiming to speak to everyone as a universal thing, as a universal fact, but through your local reality. And that's something we don't see that often. And we don't research as often because we as scholars are influenced by the habitus of our fields, to say it with Bourdieu, which I love.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Víctor. Thank you, Andre. Well, it's time. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you once again, Víctor, for being with us.